right. So it's our third year doing this, third year in a row doing this. And I wanted to compare it to the previous 2 years because 2020, man, has obviously been a crazy year. We're going to remember it for a lot of different things. But how do you think 2020 kind of compared in hip hop, at least the genre, compared to the previous 2 years that we've been reviewing?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think it's crazy because I think we were just on here for 2019 talking about what a like great year it was for hip hop, and not to say that good things didn't happen in hip hop this year. It was definitely a more slow year. I mean, we saw a lot of the major acts kind of push their coming albums back into next year, so that way they can get their touring dates off and able to perform some of their songs live. A lot of artists that, especially in this generation, rely heavy on being played in the club scenes and people having that response to the music in person. And so I think a lot of those artists kind of pushed it back. And so I think the positive in this year is I think a lot into more of the underground artists kind of came forth. With like a push from guys like Griselda kind of coming up and really making a name for themselves. They kind of brought with them a lot of other underground artists, a lot of ones that us three are very familiar with and have been listening to for years. But now we see them kind of get more shine because people were really fiending for music. And so I think positive. I think there was more of a stronger presence of lyricism this year for the few records that we did get from artists. But it was definitely a weird year. But I think and then maybe next year if things get better and artists can start touring again, we'll really see like a bigger emergence of all of those I would say like class A acts, like A-list celebrity, A-list rappers coming out with their albums and stuff. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with most of what you said. It's a weird year for sure, but it did open up the door for like the not necessarily like younger, just the more unheard of people. You mentioned Griselda, and then even though Alchemist has been doing this shit for like 30 years, like he got a Grammy nod, and just him alone, he put out like 6 albums this year, and I think that finally allowed him to get a little more shine. And but I think next year will be a big year. I think guys like Kendrick Lamar and like you said, A-list rappers, I think they're gonna start, plan a big tour and probably, have an album roll out with that. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting year.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like this was like a year for like producers to kind of get their shine too. Like you mentioned like Alchemist coming out, like Derringer, like we didn't see so many projects or like repeat acts coming up like, oh, he second project or they dropped this mixtape. I know you have artists like Ransom who dropped like 5 projects this year, which was and none of them missed, like they were all hits. But you'd see like Derringer working on this project or Ghost LTD working on that one, and they pull these projects in together. Hit Boy had a fucking crazy year because he was just working with so many artists and putting out good music. And like I said, it was music that everyone was fiending for. So I feel like that mixed with, early quarantine days when they were doing like versus battles between producers and stuff, that kind of like put a shine on them. We were able to focus in more on like, oh, it's beyond what is just like, oh, this artist's catalog. Now let's look at the producer's catalog and, oh, they did this song. They did this song. It kind of brought a little bit more light to their work, which I thought was
Probably because producers are, used to staying home and just making beats and shit. Nothing changed.
Yeah, no, that's a
right?
good point.
Yeah, they were probably thriving in this time too. But
Yeah.
like you said, Vince, too, I think it kind of there was a little shift as far as like conscious hip hop. We saw a lot more of those like B plus level artists, and they're not B's because like of their quality. It's just because of like recognition as far as like getting, they're not getting played on the radio all the time and that kind of stuff. But I even think we saw like from like I guess you could say like a quality level artist and like Lil Baby when he had that song Bigger Picture, like that's not the type of music he usually makes. But we saw a lot of artists kind of shift into that because of, all the protests that was going on with George Floyd, the sports kind of stopping. I mean, there was a lot of shit going on this year. And I felt like, art is a reflective of the times. And definitely 2020 was some wild time. I think a lot of people had to self-reflect a lot too. And I feel like we had a lot more self-reflective music. You know, like even like the single that West Side Boogie dropped the other day, you know, that was very reflective, I thought. And like there's a lot of albums. I feel like 4 of my 5 top albums this year were all kind of like had that self-reflected theme, which I thought was cool because in a normal year, like who's to say we would have gotten that? So I think it was cool. Like you said earlier, though, like, you know, albums from Kendrick, Absol, J. Cole, I was kind of looking forward to this year. They all kind of pushed those back, and a few other like A-level artists pushed their stuff back. But it was a good time to shine for the, you know, guys coming up. You know, like I think guys like Reason, Amine, those guys kind of really stood out this year, and they had a chance to shine.
Yeah, I forgot about the Amine album. That shit was hard.
Yeah.
I remember that was like one of the in our group text, the first albums of the year. And when it came out, it was like, oh shit, no, we're getting like some actual music, something actually pushing in the streets. And so that was dope.
Yeah. So speaking of, you know, these artists that kind of came out to the scene this year and kind of really shine, who are some artists that really broke out into the scene for you in your little bubble, as far as maybe someone you weren't listening to before last year, but kind of now you're all into their discography this year?
I think one of the main ones for me, and his album was one of my favorite albums, but I think he kind of teeters more on the R&B side of things. But Blast, definitely. He dropped a project, No Love Lost, this year. And I just early on in the year, like when he was kind of teasing music, and, you know, a few guys that I follow on Instagram were working with him and, you know, doing his visuals and stuff. And so I saw like little snippets of it and just like promotional work that he was doing, like just ground level stuff, like within his hometown, LA. Right when the album came out, he did like a small pop-up in Carson. It was powered by, you know, Red Bull Records, so he had some like push behind him. But ever since that dropped, it just was a huge emergence, and I've just seen a lot of people kind of gravitate towards that music, you know, from anybody, you know, guys that I know in LA versus people in Orange County, even, you know, random Instagram girls, you know, posting his music. When you start to kind of get recognition on that level, it kind of shows the artist really like expanding. I think definitely him, I would say, was one of the ones that I wasn't listening to last year, but then kind of up this year. And then, I mean, I'm going to mention them a lot this whole show, but everybody from Griselda, I know even last year, because they put out, you know, 10, 15 projects a year, it's like, and last year I didn't have them in my top 5, but I know I had mentioned that it's because you could see that they were gearing up for something more. They're ready to like push the lines and kind of break into the industry a little bit more, but still being authentic to who they were. And I feel like they really did that this year. Almost every single one of their artists, whether it was dropping From God or From King to a God, or Benny dropping Burden of Proof, like I feel like it pushed them into another stratosphere of hip hop, and definitely made them more notable, just the average, you know, rap listener. You know, West Side Gun doing his own thing, moving more into the executive role, but still being a curator and everything. I think they definitely had a explosive year. So I would say those two. Ransom, like I mentioned him earlier, another artist that I had heard a few records, because I feel like me and JJ are the same. We get familiar with like certain producers because we know the content that they put out. And then so that's kind of how I got introduced to Ransom. He put out, I want to say it was like 4 or 5 projects this year. And like I said, all of them, every single one of them, he's a crazy lyricist, and he was really grinding this year, and it just kind of shows somebody, you know, pushing through the year, using this year to really hustle and put their music out. So him too.
Yeah, man, Griselda did have a big year. But I'd say for me, you guys heard of Lee James?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he put out a project with Alchemist this year, and I listened to that one a lot. It's called Price of Tea in China.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wasn't listening to him at all last year. I think just like you said, the familiarity with, you know, different producers and the stuff they put out, you know, I gave it a listen and I really enjoyed it. And kind of like a lesser known dude, I'd say, rapper named Overcast, just became familiar with his stuff. I think he has collaborations with Earl Sweatshirt. That's probably how I got familiar with him. But yeah, I don't know. I'd say I'd have to go with Griselda as well for like someone who broke this year. And I mean, you know, just as a collective, all of them doing their thing, you know, going their own direction, not necessarily, you know, still being but not necessarily like having to hang with each other. You know, they can go their own route. But yeah, that was cool to see.
definitely.
I think you guys were mentioning, you know, Griselda, Benny the Butcher, West Side Gun, all you know, them last year at the 2019 kind of best hip hop of the year show. And you know, I had heard of them really, but like 2020 for sure was like the year where I kind of paid attention to them more. I really like, you know, their albums kind of I was able to like save them into the library, that kind of thing. Like I really enjoyed some of their music this year. An artist who kind of came onto the scene for me this year was Larry June, you know, LA native. And I saw a tweet the other day. I had to bookmark it because I thought it was funny. Larry June is just Dom Kennedy with a smoothie machine and a Whole Foods card. And I thought that was funny because, you know, Larry June does have like that very mellow, like West Coast kind of flow that Dom Kennedy has. I think he has that like deep voice too that remember Left Brain from Odd Future. So I have to say it's like a combination of Left Brain and Dom Kennedy. And he does be rapping a lot about like healthy stuff, you know, watering his plants and all that kind of thing. But I think he had 5 projects that came out this year.
Yeah.
2 of them were solo. He had a project with Burner. He had a project with the producer Harry Fraud. So, you know, I think, you know, he was busy this year and he was somebody that people mentioned to me at the beginning of the year, like, oh, keep an eye out for Larry June, keep an eye out for Larry June. And I finally gave him a listen probably around September, which was a little later than when most people are already onto him. And I kind of like his flow because he just, you know, like I said, he's preaching like this healthy living stuff that, you know, artists don't always be talking about, but I thought he had a pretty big 2020. And then another rapper for me too, I guess more on the like melodic side, almost R&B, but Coda the Friend. He's from New York, and I just feel like he kind of similar to Larry June. He's more on that lo-fi instrumental, but he has again very like that chill, mellow music. And if like you're just cruising, you don't have to, you're not in a rush to go anywhere. I feel like his music is perfect, especially for like the windows down kind of thing. And you know, this is going to be an ongoing thing too. But this was my first year using Spotify. I had a full year at least. I turned over to Spotify. I want to say November last year, so I didn't really get the whole experience last year. But man, Spotify really puts you on to new artists with the whole daily mixes and the discoveries and that kind of stuff. And those 2 artists came up via those kind of things. So shout out to Spotify for helping me, you know, get to know new artists and stuff like that. But if it wasn't for Spotify, I don't think I'd be listening to those guys and have them, you know, constantly like paying attention to what they're dropping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do got their AI or whatever you want to call it, their algorithm, that because you go on there, I feel like it's just easier to discover music than it is versus Apple Music and having to like search for it and really know the artist before you even open the app, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The recommendations are like pretty crazy. I mean, I remember last year, like people were telling me Spotify, join it. And I was kind of reluctant too, because especially as an Apple user, you're just like, like Apple Music, so much, it's just easy, you know, it's already on the phone, but like definitely worth making the switch. If you're listening, you're not on Spotify already, then please make the switch. We ain't even getting sponsored, but just fucking make the switch, yeah.
Buy the albums first and then stream it.
Yeah.
So moving on to some of the more like little low key things as far as like individual songs, individual verses, individual tracks that we really enjoyed. We could start it off with the, I guess, overall favorite track, not the album. Doesn't have to be a single, but just what was like your favorite track of 2020, that song that you could see yourself playing for years and years to come?
I think just because it was a really dope moment, just with, you know, the passing of Smoke and everything. But "Got It On Me" was definitely one. I know I had heard like a released like leaked demo a long time ago when he had kind of laid the vocals for it, and he was doing the Many Men Flip, a 50 Cent song. And I know at that time he had put out like PTSD, and a lot of people were comparing him to having like sense like flow, and his like almost his voice almost sounds like his jaw was clenched, like when 50 couldn't move his jaw. And so I had heard that and I thought it was really dope. And then with the passing of, and then 50 Cent kind of, you know, helping curate the album and, you know, did some work on it. I'm not sure to what extent, but, you know, he had his hands in the release of that album. Came out to have that song, and then, you know, it's a new beat and everything, but him kind of pulling from that verse and the chorus, I thought was really dope. And I think when Spotify did do their 20 rap, that was like my most listened to song, just because it was just one of those crazy moments. I think as we get older, we kind of are able to recognize samples a little bit. I don't want to say better. JJ could probably recognize samples like crazy because he works with them, but like for us, like you're seeing music kind of sampled from earlier in, not so much like, oh, this song is pulled from a 70s funk record that, you know, the the beat producer might have switched up a little bit, but now they're using songs that we up with and kind of giving a nod to that. And I thought that was dope that Pop Smoke did that. And the fucking record is just crazy. It's just hard. You just want to get in your car and just turn that shit up to ignorant levels and listen to it. I had to give it to that. I mean, I feel like this year more, I know we were talking about conscious stuff more, but I feel like I just got even grimier with the music that I was listening to. A lot of shit that makes you want to just put a box cutter across somebody's face. But but yeah, I had to give it to that song. It's like, honestly, because it was the number one song that I had on my Spotify. I go back and forth between the two, Apple Music and Spotify, but Spotify, I try to keep it strictly hip hop because, like you said, for the purpose of the algorithm and them being able to introduce you to new stuff. But if I'm, going to different genres, I'll go to Apple Music because I don't really care about that getting messed up. But yeah, man, Got It On Me by Pop Smoke, probably my favorite record of this year.
I'd say my favorite record would be off the Alfredo album, Freddie Gibbs. God Is Perfect. I think it's like the second track on there, but that was probably like my top played song on Spotify this year. Just plus it came out, I think it came out early in the year. So I remember like gyms were open, we were going to the gym, and that song was like I was always playing that song. Just like his flow on that and the beat, it's crazy. But yeah, there's a couple others too. I can't really just go with one, but producer Knowledge dropped the album 1988 earlier this year. There's a track on there called Don't Be Afraid. I think it's also like the second on there, but I don't know. For me, choosing these songs was more of like what I found myself playing over and over and over. To me, that obviously means there's something about it that you really like. So, that one I was playing every day, first couple months it came out. And then I mentioned Overcast, rapper, earlier, but there's a track on his 2020 release. It's called Face, but it's really self-reflective and kind of, it's refreshing, something new. The sound, the lyrics, content, like kind of, Noah was talking about like more, not necessarily like health conscious, but like just more positive types of things. And I think that's kind of what everyone was really thinking about this year, having some time to themselves and I don't know, just too much time to think, but it's kind of that was a good track to listen to for like times we're in.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Like trying to choose one was a little tough for me though. Like the ultimate favorite had to be 10 Points by Nas on his album King's Disease. I feel like he was talking about some like real grown man shit right there, talking about, that he dropped in lines like childhood trauma holding us back, that kind of thing. Just talking about a lot of different stuff as far as I felt like like it related to me, like we're in our, latter half of the 20s now. And I feel like, we're in this weird position where like we kind of got to grow up, but we're still like unsure of like necessarily like what or how to go about that. So just I felt like Nas was hitting on a lot of stuff that people don't usually talk about. And I don't even think Nas really talks about it a lot too. But 10 Points for sure is like every time that shit comes on, I got to turn that volume all the way up and break my headphones for that. And then some other songs too that I really enjoyed. That one came out in August, and a lot of my songs came out later in the year. My favorite songs came out later in the year. Outside with Westside Boogie and Joey Badass. I mean, that one only came out, I think, in December, so it's only been out for a few weeks. But that one, man, since it came out, like I probably played that shit already like 40 times already, man. This is another really good like self-reflective song, especially I think Boogie's like his second verse or the third verse of the song where he talks about like, just I don't know, just again, it's self-reflective where I think he dropped the line where he's like, if I meditate, like will I get through to my brain? I smoke weed to keep me sane, that kind of thing. And it was just kind of like, oh shit, like I don't know, I felt like it kind of related to me, and especially with the times that we're going through, like JJ said, and it's going to be an ongoing theme. We were forced to think a lot more this year because of a lot of shit was on pause, so we couldn't really go out and do a lot of things. So we're stuck at home thinking a lot, and so Outsiders made me think for sure. And then this one came out, I believe, in the summer. I want to say it was July or June, but it was on that Run the Jewels 4 album. It was Just, the one with Pharrell, and I'm drawing a blank on the dude from what's Rage Against the Machine, right? What's that dude's name?
Zach De La Roca.
Oh,
yeah, Zach De La Roca. But I mean, honestly, the chorus in that the song is, you know, look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar. And what I heard is that they recorded this album before, you know, George Floyd and before the pandemic, but like when it dropped, it felt like it was talking about all this kind of stuff, and that's just type of the music that they drop anyway. So I felt like it was good timing on them to drop it at that time. But yeah, that chorus, like that, you know, I was like, oh shit, kind of makes you think again, with a lot of time to think. I remember I was working at my office job at the time, and so, you know, I was playing that song over and over again. I was like, damn, look at all these slave masters posing on your dollar, and I was just like, pulled out a dollar. I was like, fuck, like, you know. And so it was just kind of crazy. Those are like my 3 top songs from 2020. I felt like there's a lot of songs I enjoyed, for sure, but those are probably the 3 top ones where I'm just like, man, those are going to stay in rotation for a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, when it comes to duos, features, that kind of thing, what was a favorite, I guess, back and forth song that had multiple artists on for you?
I mean, there's songs, and I don't want to, you know, keep mentioning Zelda with War Paint at the end of Benny the Butcher's album, just them. I think it's dope when you have, you know, artists kind of start to break off into their own careers and put projects of their own, but then still come together. We saw it a lot with like TDE during the Black Hippie days. And, you know, you got Schoolboy Q going in one direction, Kendrick going in another, but then they'll come together for certain songs. And even, you know, some of the more recent ones, I think Vice City was probably the last Black Hippie song we heard off of J-Rock's album. So I think moments like that, especially when Zelda kind of going down that same direction that they're going in, and them coming together for records like that, they all hop back on War Paint. I know we were talking about like best verses and stuff too. It you know, when you have Conway the Machine mentioning, you know, meeting Beyonce and telling his girl about it, and, you know, it's just, I think it's a verse where he's like, I couldn't, if my shorty was such a fan, or in that moment she realized I'm the motherfucking man. And it's true. Like, you seeing these artists kind of break into the industry and kind of surround themselves with different people, and you know, to get from Jay-Z, for those guys, especially being from the East Coast and upstate. And I think it's dope for them to kind of get that shine and put it together on a record where they're kind of, you know, showcase that. Benny talking about his story, Conway talking about his, and then West Side Gun just, you know, talking his talk, crack sales, you know. So I think that's definitely one of them. I think when it comes to probably my favorite feature of the year, and this is probably going to be a theme every year if somebody drops a Nipsey verse, but Big Sean on his album, Deep Reverence, was another one that you kind of heard, got a little teaser of it before, when Hit Boy was doing the verses against Boy Wonder, and they were playing records back and forth, and he played an unreleased track off the Big Sean album. And then the first thing you heard was Nipsey's voice, and people went crazy. And the shit that Nipsey was saying on that verse was just out of control, man. He went off on that. So that's definitely, like, I think of features and best one of the year, I definitely go to that Nipsey on Deep Reverence for sure.
Crazy how he, like, obviously, you know, he didn't record that like recently, but it can always be relevant. You know?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's crazy.
We even saw it last year too. He was on that, I think it was Welcome Home, right, on the Games album, Born to Rap.
Yeah.
And again, he recorded that, you know, before he passed, obviously, but it still like remained relevant to the time when they dropped it, you know.
Yeah.
Nipsey does a lot of talking about dying for his streets and stuff, so it's like those verses definitely hit different. As we know, you know, he was taken in front of his own hood, in front of his own store. So those are definitely always going to be like top tier when you hear that, because I mean, the man really, really stood behind what he said. And so it's one thing you always got to salute when you hear
it. Yeah, for me, like, duo wise this year, I'd say I'd have to go with Alchemist and Freddie Gibbs on Alfredo. You know, they got the Grammy nod. Every track on there, you know, gold. But, you know, it wasn't just those two. You know, Alchemist, he had, like I said earlier, he dropped like 6 albums, and I think there was like 3 or 4 collab albums. Conway, Boldy James, Freddie Gibbs. But it was cool to see him kind of have these guys gravitate to him. He makes his beats, he allows these guys to tell their story. And for me, with like Boldy James, I think he's from like Detroit or something. And the type of stuff that he's rapping about, I'm far removed from that. But being able to listen to Alchemist lay down his beats and Boldy James, say like what he's lived through, all this stuff. It's cool to have that insight, and I think that's like what hip hop's all about. And I think that's why I liked all these collabs so much this year.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Freddie Gibbs too, the past 2-3 years, he's gotten a lot more recognition than he has in the past. I think like guys like us, we always kind of had heard about him, but I feel like more and more now with like mainstream hip hop fans are starting to get to know more of Freddie Gibbs, and he's getting a lot more recognition, which is cool to see. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite features, or song they featured different artists, both came from Reason's album New Beginnings, and that's an album we'll be talking about a lot later on too. But the first one I want to mention is the I Can Make It with Rhapsody. Man, that was a nice little back and forth, and I was really high on Rhapsody at the end of last year with their album Eve. I thought that was a really well put together album. And then, Rhapsody, she signed to Rock Nation, I want to say like early 2010s decade. And but she's one of those artists, like every time I hear her music, I'm like, man, how does she not end up with Dreamville because of the Carolina connection, or TDE? Just because I feel like the content and like the music she makes is like so on par with what both those like camps are doing. And so anyways, for her to like collab with TDE again, Reason, another upcoming artist, and you really felt like their hunger in this in that song. And I feel like, man, like Rhapsody's verse, I think outshined Reason. And I don't know if he intended for that, but I mean, like the first verse, or like the opening part of her verse is like, I'd rather shake my ass and, get a band. I'd rather shake my ass than, drop some bars for these bands, because especially with females in the hip hop industry, I mean, it's very apparent now, like if you are very attractive, that kind of thing, you're going to get more national recognition from, mainstream hip hop fans and the festivals and that kind of thing. Like we've seen with Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, Saweetie, all those girls, not to like take away from their talents at all, but because they're willing to show more of their body than say Rhapsody, they're getting more attention and they're getting more push from these labels and stuff like that. So she kind of talks about that and kind of like flips the wrist, like she like, instead of, being woke or rapper, she wants to rather like shake her ass. And I thought that was kind of funny to open up her verse like that. And then another one from that album, I think, was the Extinct song with Isaiah Rashad and JID. I mean, that's the first time we've heard Isaiah Rashad in a fat minute, right? I mean, he's kind of been silent, working on his album at his own pace. And man, I mean, the whole, like, he opens up the song, and I thought it was a really good one. He dropped a line in there that was says, like, before you fuck me, you got to go get your Gary Paytons. And I thought that was really hard because Gary Payton was nicknamed the Glove. And I was like, man, a lot of like, unless you were an NBA head, like you're not going to get that reference. But I was like, damn, that's super sneaky, And then Reason had a lot of good verses. He actually had my favorite bar of the year. We'll get into that later on that song. And then obviously JID's too. Man, he opened up the song with like, man, I forgot what the first line was, but he's like psychoanalysis. I feel like Sigmund Freud. And I was like, oh shit. Like they came to play. Like they were just going for those like one-liners in that song. And they definitely hit home with that one. So those are like my two favorite songs with multiple artists on it. Now, sticking with that theme of the favorite bar, who was some of your favorite bars? We can kick it off with you, JJ, of the year.
Man, I mean, I honestly can't tell you like like off the top of my head. I don't know. I think I just listen to music differently than you guys, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. Like I like, I can't like, I just can't recall stuff like you guys can. But I'll say overall, like I think this year was much more, conscious and going with the theme of like self-reflection and stuff like that. I think a lot of rappers went in that direction, or not was like really a choice, but probably because you know, you're not out making experiences and all this stuff, and you're kind of left with like your own thoughts and uh having to come up with, you know, content based on that. And yeah, I know I'm lame. I can't like recall any bars or whatever, but like I'll leave it with that. Like I think that there is a lot of, you know, good lyrical content out there overall.
For sure. No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I know I mentioned it, so I'll talk about that one first. But the line that Conway said in War Paint, just about, you know, meeting Beyonce, and I think you mentioned Nation Brunch, which for a lot of artists is like somewhere where you want to be. It's like that scene that they want to get on, and so I thought that line was dope. Um, I give overall reason on his new album and that last track where he's kind of reflecting and talking about TDE. And just like his label situation, which you don't hear, and for him to kind of bring that to the forefront and really talk about it, and almost like his frustrations with it, or just like this self-doubt that you have. And I think a lot of times that happens, you might be given a great opportunity in your, but then you start questioning whether you can take it on and stuff like that. I felt like he was going through that kind of internal struggle on that song. So I thought that was really dope that he did that. I would say the chorus from Legend by Benny the Butcher, where he's talking about it, I thought that was really dope because, you know, a lot of times with artists coming up, you know, they kind of give him like, oh, yo, he's going to be a legend. Like they kind of look more towards what they can do rather than embrace what they're doing at the moment. And that was kind of what he's saying in that track is, no, I'm a legend now. And I think that's very true. I think he's doing something crazy. I think we're witnessing him kind of shift, you know, hip hop in general. And the fact that he's able to get like a brighter shine on lyricism, it speaks to what he can do. And so I thought that, and it's one of those things, like especially like Nipsey, like a lot of people talk about like, oh, yo, he was gearing up to be a legend. It's so sad that he was taken from us. And while that statement is true, like when you really on the hip hop scene, when you listening to what they were doing in LA, you knew Nipsey was a legend already. He had already kind of laid this like groundwork of what he was building up to do. And it was on par with what, you know, Jay-Z has done for hip hop. You know, I think it's wild to say, but I think for certain artists, we need to start giving them the legend stamp early. Like, oh, this is what they're doing at the beginning of their career. Like we can already recognize what they're going to do with it. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I would say, speaking of Nipsey, and like I said, on that Deep Reverence song, he has a line in there where it says, block the deep reverence. I was born in the C-section. I thought that shit was hard. Just, I'm always a sucker for double entendres. He was born Rolling 60 Crip area. You know, that's what he's represented, what he brings to the front lines and stuff. And to flip that, and I was born in the C-section, you know, whatever pregnancy term that is, whatever. But just to flip it, it's just one of those bars that's just, I remember when I heard it, because like I said, I heard it in the verses first. And then so when the track came out, I think it was like maybe the day before they had released Big Sean's album, and him and Hit Boy Twitter talking about, yo, should we release Deep Reverence? And you know, when an artist does that, you already know they have it geared up to release. It's not like the fans are really going to decide. They already got it going through Apple Music's, you know, some and everything. So when I heard that, I was like, I remembered that line, those few verses that Nipsey said, and I was like, yo, I got to listen to this shit in the car. I think I was at my fiance's house, and I was like, oh, fuck this. I'm going to go on a ride. So I got in the car, turned that shit up, just blasted it. I think I was on Instagram when I was doing it too, and it was just, that shit was just fucking crazy. So I definitely have to give that verse of the year if it got me out of the house into the car to drive around just to listen to it.
There you go. For me, my favorite bar, and it was like it was probably like 4 lines from Reason in that song Extinct. He talks about the industry as a whole, but right before that, he talks about like, no more buying bags for, and I'm a paraphrase because of the language, but no more buying bags for women who can't, you know, buy their own. And then he said the following line was, no more getting brain from women that I can't learn from. And I thought that was like a tricky wordplay right there. And then also too, like, right, he follows that line with, we went from H to the Izzo to rappers with gimmicks showing their ass more than Lizzo. And I just thought like that was really, again, like a reflective of the time of hip hop, right? Again, like paying homage to Jay-Z's track in the early 2000s. And that, you know, was the first time we saw like, you know, artists really like kind of blow up and make it to the scene. And it's because they had like really, I'm not saying like the art has changed a lot, but like what's pushing now in the mainstream. And I think that's what Reason is addressing is like, you know, here we were 20 years ago praising Jay-Z for that line or for that song. And now we're praising, you know, women like Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B. Not, again, not to take away from their artist talent, but because they're showing their ass, so they're getting more of a push. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of funny, like how he threw that in there. And then, you know, again, he just takes that shot at Lizzo. And we all remember what happened at, I believe it was at like Laker game she was at, where she was, you know, had her ass hanging out. I was like, what the fuck, you know? So, you know, it's just the state of the industry right now. And I just think it was very reflective. And then favorite verse for me, though, has to go to Ab-Soul on Who Wants What. I mean, when that shit dropped, it was off a EP with Russ. I forgot what month it was. I want to say it was like October, maybe November. But man, that shit, like there were so many bars. I mean, you know how I'm a geek over Ab-Soul for a little second, real quick. Just because like he always has little double entendres, a tricky wordplay, and man, like, you know, the whole you're talking about like the entendres too. He's like, I'm well read like the Nickerson Gardens. You know, I thought that was a tight little double entendre. He was also talking about I'm drawing a blank. Oh, he, you know, there was that little line where he's like, "Where the lyricist at?" And then he has the cricket noise. You know, how sad. You're clicking on even on top of the game. That shit's a mouse pad. And I was like, damn. So he just, it was like, you know, funny wordplay after one after another. And I feel like hip hop's missing that. You know, it wasn't directed at anybody per se, but just towards the industry as a whole. So I thought that was really cool. I mean, honestly, like no disrespect to Russ, but like every time that song comes on, I'm just like, I gotta fast forward like halfway just to Ab-Soul. And it's not that Russ has a bad verse. It's just like I said, I geek over Ab-Soul like hella hard sometimes. And man, that verse was probably like one of my favorites that he's ever dropped.
Definitely.
Cool. So now we're about to get into the time that I'm sure everyone's been waiting on. I think the most fun part about doing this the past 2 years is kind of developing that top 5 list to see how while we're all hip hop heads, we all have, like I said earlier, little different like subgenres of hip hop. So it's kind of cool when we put our top 5 list of the year together. And so let's go ahead and get into it. Vince, I'll let you kick it off with 5, then we'll go JJ and then myself, and then we'll kind of do a snake where I'll start it off for 4 and we'll kind of go back the other way.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. So I would have to give the number 5 spot to the Pop Smoke album that came out. I know he had 2. I think he had Meet the Woo 2 at the beginning of the year, and then he passed. And then they came out with The Stars. And so, yeah, I just, again, like, I think it was super unfortunate, you know, him passing. I think he was kind of building this new buzz. He had kind of brought like Brooklyn Drill to the forefront and just really brought like a different flow. He had a different voice. It was something that we hadn't heard before, which is always refreshing to hear in hip hop, whether you know, hang on the lyricist side or you like more of ignorant music, no matter what you like when somebody brings a new sound to hip hop, it's always refreshing. I think for us, we understand that a little bit more than like the generation versus like the super young generation, the clash that they have. But I feel like Pop Smoke kind of bridged that in a sense. A lot of people had respect for him, and that's what made that album so special. There was also moments that I felt in that album that kind of just gave you that like good taste of hip hop. You know, him nodding to 50 Cent. He had flipped a couple tracks, like older songs, and kind of put his own spin to it, which is always something that I kind of champion because I think it's dope when an artist can do that and they bring their style to it. And he kind of was the epitome of that on that album. Also, I think that song that he had, Paranoid, with Young Thug, there's always like this tension whenever Pusha T gets on a verse and people suspect that he's Drake. And I think Young Thug had a problem with that. So there was a little bit of like back and forth between them before Pusha T had hit his manager, who's the same manager as Pop Smoke's, and was take me off the album. I don't want to make it about this, but I think those moments are cool. And like when you go and you dig up that record and you get this Pusha T verse that isn't on the album, but you could still kind of put in your phone. I think those are always dope. And that's one of my favorite songs from that album is that Paranoid, but with Pusha T's verse on it. So I think that album was just a cool moment in hip hop. So I had to give that number 5 just because it was, I feel like the biggest, like, you know, we were talking about A-list celebrities kind of being quiet this year, but I feel like that was a really big album to come out. It had a lot of artists on it, you know, like Quavo, you know, like I said, Young Thug, a lot of these artists that we would normally see pushing records through this year and being on Billboard Top 100 throughout the entire year. You know, they didn't really show up, but they showed up for that album, and to do that for Pop Smoke, I think was dope. And so I had to kind of throw that in there with the top 5.
Yeah. For me, my fifth favorite album this year. When I was going through this list, it was more like for me. It was like what I found myself replaying. That's just an easy indicator for me of if I liked it or not. And also, obviously, you listen to something all the way through, no skips. By the time you know it's over, and then like, let's run it back. But Knowledge, 1988. There's actually no raps on this one, really. I think there's a couple tracks that are remixes, but I don't know, there's not much to it, thought wise, putting it here. But other than like, I was playing time, it's just beats, not much else to say. It's dope though, dope enough for me to say it was my fifth most favorite album this year. But definitely worth a listen, just driving around, cruising, whatever.
Yeah, for me, number 5, it was a little tough to put actually like a top 5 together. I feel like there was probably like 6 or 7 albums in the mix for 4 and 5, honestly. But ultimately, I came to the conclusion with Miles by Blue and Exile. I really hadn't discussed or heard of Blue and Exile as a duo until before this year. Again, shout out to Spotify for that one. I've heard of Blue, and then I learned that he had with the producer Exile, they've done projects together. The last one was in 2013, so I guess this one was a long time in the making. But as far as it wasn't really relevant to like what was going on this year, but it's just a lot of lyricism. It's a lot of bars. And I think what's cool about Exile, his beats have a lot of like Jay Dilla sound to them. He's worked with groups that I've liked, like in Jurassic 5. He's worked with like Aloe Black and a few other people in that kind of like subgenre of hip hop. So like, I already like that sound of music. Blue has, like I said, a pretty heavy lyricist flow. And I still feel like they stay true to like that underground sound. With that album Miles, they also have a lot of songs that tie in with their names, like obviously Blue. There's a song titled Blue, and the feeling blue, that kind of thing. I think one of my favorite songs and what really pushed it over the top for me compared to some of these other albums, and we can get to honorable mentions later, but it's one of the songs, Dear Lord. I think it's track, how many tracks is there? 7, is there 20 songs? So I think it's track 17 on the album. And the opening lines is like, he's talking about like, I wish there was I ask God that there's no Christians, no Muslims, no, and he starts listing off all these religions and all these like secular groups. And I was kind of like, as a listener, first time listening through, it kind of caught me off guard. It's like, where's he going with this? Like, is he trying to piss off a lot of people? But then he goes with the whole like unity approach where it's like, and like we understand, like we basically like take down these barriers. So we understand that we're one human race. We come together, put our heads together, basically make this world a better world, cleaner world. And he talks, like I said, he talks about a lot of different shit and stuff that I feel like, as a grown man now, I'm kind of like trying to be a part of too. So I just thought that was a cool thing. But like I said, it kind of, like I said, it as a listener, you're like, whoa, like what is he trying to say right here in the beginning? Because I'm not anti-religion or anything. And I'm just like, the whole album doesn't sound like that either. But then I felt like that was very reflective, especially with this year and everything that was going on. It's just kind of like preaching unity. So that was cool. But as far as, the rest of the album, again, just really good lyricists. I think this is an album, especially with the beats too, Choice. I think that you would like it a lot, JJ, just because, like I said, he has I was listening to Exile interview, and he draws a lot of inspiration from, Jay Dilla and Slum Village and people like that. So I think it's cool that they were able to collab and put that album together. So for me, moving on to number 4, I'm gonna go with King's Disease by Nas. This one was dropped in August, so later half of the year. And kind of like what I said earlier with 10 points, I felt like Nas was just putting us on a lot of grown man stuff, like grown man knowledge. Very similar to how Jay-Z structured the 444 album, right? And so I just think there was a lot of tracks where I felt like really related to, 10 points again, probably one of my favorite songs. The only reason this isn't higher in my list, I felt like I knocked Nas for this one, because he ends basically like, I think he should have ended the album with the song The Cure, but he chose to put in, I think it's Spicy with ASAP Ferg. And I just felt like it didn't really fit the theme of the album. I felt like it could have been a single standalone. I don't know if like contract wise he was obliged to put it in there or that kind of thing, or to meet certain standards. I don't know. But like even in The Cure, he talks about like, all right, roll the credits. And again, super reflective song, talks about a lot in his life. Talks about, I think there was a line too in The Cure where he's talking about like, the McCarthy's passed the Lennons, or the McCarthy's outlived the Lennons, but the Lennons go the hardest. And I was like, oh, like he's paying homage to other music genres, which I think is cool, especially from an older artist. And I don't know, it's overall a really good album. I think we had different of opinions on what was that album called with Kanye? But
Nasir.
Oh shit. Yeah, Nasir.
Nasir. And I remember like kind of liking this one, but now that I've listened to King's Disease, especially Hit Boy 2 produced the whole album, I thought that one kind of wiped Nasir out the water with that one. So that one was really cool to see. And shout out to Hit Boy too, a guy from the Inland Empire. I really like that song Ultra Black as well on the album.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a lot of good songs on that album. So, again, no skips except for that Spicy song, man. So that's why it's not higher. That's why it's number 4 for me.
Dang, I didn't know from the Inland Empire.
Yeah. Hit Boy's from like, I think Rialto or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh. Anyways,
legend. I think he's rapped about when he's had a song with Dom Kennedy. He mentioned one of the ones that was like the funniest line to me was he mentioned like buying the Tyler Mall, the Galleria at Tyler. Yeah, he mentioned that, and I was like, yeah, fucking Hit Boy's a fucking IE legend. It's a nod to the Galleria at Tyler or Tyler Mall. But to go off of that, King's Disease was actually number 4 for me too. We've talked about, like you said, this is 3 years running, and we talked about Nas each year. Nasir came out, I think, the first year that we did it, and I know I wasn't really a fan of it. I think that whole structure of 7 songs was still brand new at that time, and so I had for some artists like the Pusha T album that he came out with that year with Kanye. I liked it for that, but I didn't really like it for Nas. I was expecting something more, and I wanted Kanye to kind of push the envelope with Nas just because of the history Nas has with like beat selection. And then last year we talked about the Lost Tapes, because I think we brought that up just in conversation. And I liked the Lost Tapes better and was like, okay, this is more what I was looking for when I heard that he was working with Kanye and going to have like what I thought was going to be better beat selection. There was one song on there that I absolutely hated. I forgot what it was called, but it was the one that's like, that's his flow on it. And I could not stand that song. So I don't believe it got in my top 5. And then this year, I wasn't hesitant because I know Hit Boy can make amazing records, and then I know Nas can as well. But it's just 2 kind of different worlds coming together. And, Hit Boy, I think, proved that he could really work with any artist, especially bouncing from Big Sean to then working with Benny the Butcher to, working with Nas. I think it kind of showed his versatility a little bit. And I know you mentioned you didn't like the Spicy song. I liked it for the reason that was the one I was most worried about, because I see he's on a song with A$AP Ferg and Fabio Foreign, and I'm like, all right, that's not Nas's. Like, he doesn't really belong in that. So it was like, when I at first saw that kind of worried me a little bit about the album. I was like, is he going to try to do like a commercial album and kind of lead it in that direction? So I was definitely worried about it. I enjoyed the Spicy song just because it was so far left for Nas, but he was kind of held his pocket and was doing his thing on it. What I like most of the album is when you cut it on, you get songs like Car 85, and it's like, okay, this is like a very well polished record because it's being produced by somebody like Hit Boy. But then you have just the lyricism and just that Nas flow, man. It was everything that I was expecting from these past 2 albums. Was kind of like finally like, all right, I could put this in my top 5 like proudly, because this is Nas, and you always want to throw him in your top 5. But when he's coming out with these records where you're like, you should never be like, I don't know how I feel about this with Nas, because he's Nas. And the fact that these past 2 albums, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. It's like, well, you can't put it in your top 5 for that reason, because Nas shouldn't be making records like that.
Yeah.
But I think this album kind of front to back for me was like, all right, this is the that I wanted to hear. This is him getting like exactly like what you said, getting his 444 off. Jay-Z kind of set that groundwork, no pun intended, but the blueprint for being able to kind of transition as an artist into your older age and just kick game to the younger generation, whether they're listening or not. And I think Nas kind of did that same thing, like, with records, like you said, with 10 points and stuff. So definitely like one of the records that I like went back on throughout the year and was like, all right, I can I think I had gotten a new car when I first got the Nas album. So I was like, all right, this is the first one in that car. So it's that like special moment of just driving around to it and just cycling through his music, and it flowed perfectly. So threw that in the top 5 for sure at number 4.
See, I got Pray for Paris at number 4, West Side Gun. I told myself at the start of this year I was gonna listen to more like West Side Gun and Griselda as a whole, and I think this one came out kind of earlier in the year. I can't remember, but
like June or May, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of features on there, and I guess I could have came back to this one for favorite features, collaborations, whatever. But I think it has like it has Freddie Gibbs, Conway, Tyler the Creator, Boldy J I talked about earlier. But yeah, just seeing the direction he went with this, with the like definitely transition more into like an executive role, like you said earlier, Vince. Really hyping it up, and I think that's kind of what made me want to listen to it too. The shit that he said on Instagram and stuff, calling himself like a god, art god, whatever. It's humorous to me. I like that, and like all the wrestling references and track called Claiborne Kick, all that stuff. That's cool to me, but because it that clashes with the lyrics and the content of it, which can be a little more dark, but I found it to be a good mix. Really enjoyed it.
If I had to give a best album artwork of the year, it'd definitely be Pray for Paris.
Yeah,
that shit was hard with the Davy and Goliath holding the head and putting his own chains that he wears on it. I think Virgil Abloh did the artwork for that too.
Yeah. And I think it's cool to even though it's just scratching the surface of it's putting people on to maybe other things that they wouldn't be interested in, like classical art, stuff like that.
I feel like it brings people, if you are into that, you kind of get pulled to it, like, oh, this artist is doing something crazy, like
True.
Let me listen. I've heard enough people say like, oh, I listen to West Side Gun because I'm a wrestling fan. It's like, so the fact that he's bringing people into that, and like, I think I just saw, because I don't really watch wrestling like that, but on his Instagram it was like pictures of him like sitting in the crowd, the same way like we see Top Dog at like the Lakers game. You see him in the red hat sitting on the side. Like you see West Side at like one of these WWF wrestling matches. So he's like on the side, and it's like, yo, Side Gun there. So he like pulls in other people from these different cultures and kind of puts them together and like displays this new sound that we had yet to hear into these past few years. So the fact that he's able to, I think, is just crazy.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool too, especially if like a wrestler had like a West Side Gun track like as their walkout song. Like that'd be hard too.
Somebody needs to do it.
All right, sticking with you, JJ. What was your number 3?
Number 3, I got A Written Testimony, Jay Electronica. I didn't really mention it too much earlier, but I don't know. It was kind of, it was anticipated. It's been a long time since Jay Electronica dropped an album, and I wasn't super familiar with his music, to be honest, before I listened to this, other than just the name and kind of like the hype. But it was a good listen. I had Jay-Z featured on there, which I think that alone would probably get you guys to check it out. But I could have mentioned this earlier when I said I didn't have a lyric, but there's a song. I gotta look it up real quick. Song with Jay-Z actually, but it's got a sample by this. Like, anyways, it's really like the feeling of it. Is crazy. It's called APIDTA. It's an acronym. Not sure what it stands for, but
I think it's all praise due to Allah or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, they're talking about, I assume, people that passed away or just lost connections, whatever. And I think the line Jay-Z says is, I got numbers on my phone that'll never ring again. And I don't know, just the mood of the song is crazy to hear, you know, Jay-Z talking about something so deep, you know, losing someone or whatever. That track kind of carried it for me in terms of like putting it in my top 5.
Definitely.
Yeah,
That was
you
actually,
guys should check that out.
Yeah, I think because I don't think Jay Electronica's ever like put out like an actual album. He's only released like songs and stuff. So this was technically his like first like body of work that he put together, which is crazy because I know a lot of people put Jay Elect in their top, 20 lyricists of all time kind of thing. So to barely put out your first album and it have Jay-Z on it, and it was definitely really dope. And
I think that's some level of respect too.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Who's up?
What about you, Vince? What's your number 3?
Number 3. Hold on, let me see. I would have to. I wrote everything down, just like out of order. But I think number 3, I'd have to Reason with his album New Beginnings and stuff. I mean, I think we've talked about it enough on here, but it's just he's that new artist from TDE that just restores that feeling of. I don't think you ever lose that with TDE, but when you get an artist that's on the come up and is really like grinding for that stamp of approval, and I think Reason is very conscious of the fact that he's on the same record with some of the best names in hip hop. So he mentioned it even in that outro song and stuff. And so you see him almost like, I always say it's like that NCAA grind. Like, you're trying to make it to the league.
Yeah.
We say college football is so much better than the NFL because they're really pushing. They got everything's on the line for them. Mm-hmm. And I feel he carries that with him, and you see it in these bodies of work because everything from start to finish is exactly what we want to hear from Reason. It's not him trying to break down these different and do things. No, he's just doing exactly creating the music that he wants to create and putting it out there, and using the label push, using the notoriety that he has from being associated with these artists to, hey, this is who I am though. I know that Kendrick's your favorite rapper. I know Schoolboy's your favorite rapper. Even if you're a backpacker and Isaiah Rashad is your favorite rapper, but hey, this is what I'm bringing to the table. Like, he always, I feel like, trying to constantly prove why he got the seat at the table for TDE. So, I mean, anytime somebody like Reason comes out with an album, I think it's always going to be, at least within our circle, in our kind of top 5 or like honorable mentions, just because, they kill it, man. They hustle like they broke. That's their motto, and they really live by it. Yeah.
Yeah. Reason's album was on my top 5 too. Not quite yet. He's on a little later. But number 3 for me is going to be Mozzie's Beyond Bulletproof. Living in Sacramento, Mozzie's like somebody that, so I got to hear about a lot. And I always felt like he was, I liked a lot of his music, but I couldn't say like I was a big fan, right? Like a lot of his shit was just too hard for me. It was very gangster, like that kind of thing. And I felt like Beyond Bulletproof, while there was some like gangster hardcore tracks in there, there was a lot of like reflective tracks. And I really liked the R&B angle that he had for some songs like Can't Let You Go, where Eric Bellinger sings the hook. And then Big Homie from the Hood, the last track on that album, it's a remix to Mario's Let Me Love You. And like, I think again, going back to that theme where we're now at the age where we can, people are sampling tracks from when we were like middle school or, elementary school. And I remember that song being really big, like as far as the R&B angle. And so I was just like, damn, the way he flipped that, and, the music video he shot for that was really cool because it's what Mozzie's all about. Like, he gives back a lot to his community. So like the whole music video was shot like basically at a community park in Oak Park in Sacramento. And they're having like a big cookout. Everyone's there playing softball. I believe this was shot like in the beginning of the year, so before COVID and everything. And when you watch that video now, it's honestly kind of a trip. It's like, damn, like that many people in one place, like what? Like, what are they doing? But you got to remember like the time that they shot that. And it released in January, so it probably was shot probably the winter before, So, and you mentioned Blast earlier. I felt like he had that song too, I Ain't Perfect.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
I felt like that duo was really good. I believe they dropped another song together, just a single.
Yeah, I saw that. That was later in the year.
And that's like a duo that I want to see more from them, right? I think if they had their own little EP, just Mozzie and Blast, while the sounds are two very distinct and very polar opposites, you could say, I felt like they combined beautifully on that track and the other track too that's not on the album. And so I just feel like that's really, what why it's in my top 5 is because, like I said, Mozzie's always kind of been like an artist I knew about, I checked in on and stuff like that. But I think he, it kind of definitely like one up my personal favorites. Even with the first song, Unethical and Deceitful, I think he's talking about like one of his homies, kind of like there's a lot of themes going on in that song, but I think there's one line where he talks about like you're talking to the police like it's a podcast kind of deal. And so he's talking about betrayal. I think, again, going with the theme that I mentioned earlier too, a lot of self-reflection too in songs like I Ain't Perfect, Can't Let You Go, Big Homie from the Hood, Unethical and Deceitful for the first one. But then there's those hard songs that you can get from Mozzie, like Body Count. And then they had, guys like King Von and G Herbo on that song too. So I just felt like overall, well put together album, a nice little mix of like that gangster rap as well as that like smooth, R&B instrumentals with it, with a lot of self-reflective on it too. So shout out to Mozzie. That's my number 3 album of the year. So moving on to number 2 for me, I'm going to go with Limbo by Amine. We mentioned him a little earlier too. And I feel like, again, same thing that we kind of been talking about. This is being self-reflective. There's a whole song or whole track on the album. It's just a skit, or not even a skit, but a recording of him talking about when Kobe passes, right? And I feel like all of us as somewhat sports fans, Kobe played a big part in our lives, especially living here in Southern California. And we got to see that when he passed away in January. They had the whole celebration of Kobe and JJ in the Staples Center in February. And then obviously throughout the year and in sports, whenever there was like an 8 and 24, it was like, oh, Kobe's there, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge theme for the culture. And, he talks about how Kobe's death kind of matured him very quickly. And Amine is also 26, or at least he was 26 when he recorded that album. So again, very relatable because I'm 26. And like there's a line in that track where he's like, let me figure out how taxes work, or like, let me figure out how to, kind of that kind of thing. And I was like, that's why I didn't necessarily get into that. I did feel like Kobe's death also matured me too. It was like a childhood hero. And, he had a lot of big plans, a lot of big picture stuff, and he was kind of taken away very early. And I think it kind of shows you like, you could be gone in like any second. So I really like that theme. Amine was an artist I listened to a whole lot before. Honestly, before this album, I only heard of Caroline, that that one song. And I think he did like a tribute to like ODB with like a Shimmy Ya song as well. But this album, man, from the very beginning, Burden, I believe the opening line, it's like a recording of him. Like, this is not the type of music you play in your car. This is the type of music you play in your car when you're about to pick up your homie from prison. And so I was like, oh, like that kind of sets the tone. And while I feel like it's very like melodical, he has the song Roots with JID and Charlie Wilson, which I was a big fan of. He has that song Easy, which is, again, like one of my favorite duos and features with Summer Walker. I really like their back and forth together on that one. He has a song with titled Mama by himself, Riri by himself. Again, really good songs right there. And I think another good one too was Fetus with Injury Reserve, featuring Injury Reserve. That one was cool too because it was talking about like knocking up a girl at a really young age and kind of, going about that whole situation. So again, kind of very similar to, like I said, the theme of 2020, a very self-reflective piece with some, mentions to Kobe, with some mentions about growing up, kind of understanding, just growing up and as far as being a man in the United States and that kind of deal. So I really like that one. That's my number 2 album of the year.
Show.
I'll go. Yeah. Number 2, I got Boldy James, Price of Tea in China. That's another Alchemist produced album, which I'm a huge fan. But again, I just found myself playing this one over and over, and it's just crazy to me for, a guy like Al to put out so many albums in a year and have them, in my opinion, all just, be perfect. Mm-hmm. No skips, nothing. That's crazy to me. I think it shows, his true talent and ability to kind of give all these rappers a platform to do their thing. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm far removed from the life of like Boldy James or you know, the other guys featured on here, Benny the Butcher, Freddie Gibbs, far removed from that and their experiences, but it you know, in the big picture, it gives me a chance to like look into their world and their story, and I don't know, feel a certain way, you know, like the way that they rap, the things they rap about. It's kind of one of those albums where you throw it on if you want to, I don't know, you're trying to get pumped for something, or, you know, you want to feel that way. You want to just drive around like you're the man or whatever, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I've never done any of these things. I've never sold drugs, but for however long this is, 45 minutes or whatever, like you can be immersed in that world, and just, I don't know, it's dope. That's my number 2.
For sure. Yeah, my number 2, if we're, you know, giving Alchemist praise, my number 2, Alfredo with Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist. I think Freddie Gibbs, at every single album, you know, like you said, we've talked about him on every single one of these shows. And I think he creates like this universe around his album each time, which I think is dope. Like they had a comic book come out where he's going after, like, I think it's some like cocaine monster or something. And it's just like him using his power as being half man, half cocaine. And he used that from the last album, kind of transition into this one. And that's what the comic was based around. And then they had like these Alfredo, you know, Italian restaurant themed merch come out. And so I feel like Freddie Gibbs is just moving in that direction of being an artist that creates a brand around each album, which I think is dope. And, you know, that's a big salute to him. And working with Alchemist is just kind of the perfect setup. And when you go back and listen to that early Freddie Gibbs, where he was finding his sound, he's always been ill. But to finally land with producers that are really creating the music that he should be creating, and you know, not replicating the template, but, you know, expanding upon it each time, but still keeping it true to what he is at Vane, I think is super dope. And it's just one of those front to back, straight listen, was just one of the best this year.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead and kick it off too with your number 1 album of the
Number
year.
1?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty obvious by now. I've talked about them enough, but Burden of Proof by Benny the Butcher, hands down the grimiest album I've heard in a while. And anytime I hear some shit like that, I mean, I grew up off of the Locks and early G Unit, you know, those deep cuts from 50 like Heat and stuff. So that's early 2000s grimy East Coast music, just always been absorbed by. And so for him to restore that feeling with this album, you know, I think just showing people around me, it was like, yo, this album's from this year. And, you know, it has like this older sound, but still like him just pushing the limits with bringing lyricism to the forefront is always something that you have to kind of big up, because it's hard to do with all the trends in hip hop and kind of going from this 2016 and this heavy SoundCloud microwave phase that we went through to now breaking into hearing rappers like Benny the Butcher get the most shine and like the most praise is crazy. Dude from Buffalo. What rappers come out of Buffalo before them, you know? And to talk the way he talks, the cocaine and shit like that is always good to hear that kind of restored in hip hop, because that's what it is. I mean, that's what we kind of came up on, being, you know, all of us born in the 90s, but really, you know, getting our feet wet in thousands and really diving into hip hop then. Is dope to see him come back with that. And it's one of those albums front to back. I could listen to it 6 times in a row and not even just get lost in it. So that was hands down my number 1.
Number 1 for me is Alfredo. You know, you already mentioned a lot of the things that I liked about it as well. I think the word I was looking for when I was describing how I feel listening to Boldy James, I think it was grimy. Like you just put that in my head, but Alfredo is similar with, you know, the content, but there are some tracks on there that are kind of not out of place, but like, because, you know, it all works, but what's the track? Something to Rap About, featuring Tyler the Creator. That one just sounds so pretty, and you know that it kind of what's it called? It's a contrast to what some of the other songs are talking about. And to speak on Freddie Gibbs, you touched on his ability to market each album in a different way, you know, with the merch and the other things that tie into it. And I think that kind of that hypes everything up for sure, but carries on the hype well after the album is out, because you have, if you're thinking about it like marketing wise, you have like the build up, then you have the drop, and then they release the vinyl, you know, but it just it's like always keeping you engaged. And by the time you know it, his next album comes out and it's the same thing. But I think he's on a roll right now, Freddie Gibbs. Definitely. And you know, as far as Alchemist, he's a dude that, whether you know it or not, you probably heard some of his songs on the radio early 2000s up until now. And I think it's kind of cool to hear that sound coming out again. And I think it touches on some nostalgia for me, listening to early 2000s hip hop. And, you know, to have him nominated for Grammy this year, have him, not that it matters, but have me consider him to be involved in my number one album in 2020. Like, I think that speaks on his longevity. And
definitely,
yeah, it just, that's number one for me.
Mm-hmm. And then my number one album is also another repeat from Vince's list. It's going to be Reasons, New Beginnings. And for very much of the same reasons that you already listed, I just like how it was well put together and they really let him shine. I mean, while there was some features with Schoolboy Q, I think Kendrick did the hook on Showstop, or he had some like ad libs. I won't even say it was a hook. And then he had Isaiah Rashad on there. None of those artists like kind of outshined him. I feel like he was still like put on the pedestal. This is my body of work. And he had a lot of solo songs that I thought were good too, where, he had, it felt like it was really him. And he's an artist, since I think we talked about in 2018, there you have it, artist that was coming up. 2019, while he didn't have an album, I believe we talked about him because he was on Revenge of the Dreamers. And that song Lambo Truck, that song got me even more excited. And then I think at the tail end of 2019, he started dropping some singles. This year, he was dropping more singles. He had that, I believe TDE had that, like, what was it? Like a week of like kind of releases, one by Absol, one by Punch. So, he was very active. And like you said, he's on that college grind where he's trying to grind to get recognition right now because he's not as well known as these other TD artists. And so I was really excited for this album. It definitely didn't disappoint. And like I already talked about some songs like I Can Make It, Extinct. I think my favorite part about this album and why I put it as my number one, as soon as, when I listened to it, I was like, man, it's going to be a hard album to top for any future albums, is because I liked how he had that I Can Make It back and forth with Rhapsody. And both of them, while they're really good lyricists, they're not really well respected and well known in the hip hop game. Then that very next track is Fall. And I feel like that, obviously that first verse, he talks about like a woman in the industry and he kind of leaves it very vague in the beginning, but then he makes a bar where he references like, I went to Leela and asked her for some wisdom. And that was the title of one of Rhapsody's previous albums. So I liked how it was like basically talking about her. She just wanted to be an artist. She wanted to be an artist, but, not giving up her pussy could be one of her greatest obstacles. And then the second verse in that song is talking about like a guy coming up, a male rapper in the industry. And it's basically like the label asking them questions like, where are you from? Like who you hang with? What set do you bang? That kind of stuff. And like, oh, you a conscious rapper? Like get the fuck out of here. You're not going to get any traction like that. So I felt like that song, I Can Make It, well, you just heard before, and have Fall right. And after that, it talks about the tricky parts of the industry. So overall, like one of my favorite tracks or one of my favorite albums of the year. And I feel like of all the top 5 albums this year, if we were to put like a list of like top albums from the past 3 years since we've been doing this, I think Reasons, New Beginnings is probably the one that gets the highest up on there. I'm not sure even my 2 through 5 even make that list because I feel like some of the music from 2019 and 18 were a little bit better. But yeah, Reason, glad he came through with a really nice album this year.
Hell yeah.
So we just finished up our top 5s. Want to go ahead and, Vince, you can start it off for us. Any honorable mentions from this year and maybe albums that we didn't talk about as a whole that you think should get some recognition, maybe didn't crack your top 5, but thought were worthy of mentioning at the end of the show?
Yeah, I think there was a few artists that kind of just put together like a, couple little 2, 3, 4 packs of songs this year to kind of just give the fans like a feeler. I was thinking for like next year, but some of those I think Joey Badass put out like quarantine pack. There was 2 records on there. I think it's called The Light.
Mm-hmm.
Those were definitely ill, and it's always dope to hear from Joey Badass. A lot of those smaller records that like producers put out with a lot of the guys that kind of came up after Griselda. You got like 38 Spesh. He came out with a few records and albums and mixes and stuff, whatever you want to call them. But those were all hard. Fred the Godson, rest in peace. He actually passed of COVID at the beginning of the year. But he had a few records come out, and those were always hard. And I was really looking forward to him. Kind of upset that he was taken, but definitely shout out to them. And then Black Thought as well. He put out a project and had really dope artists on it. And any type of just hardcore lyricism like that is always going to be one of those albums that kind of is constantly in rotation for me throughout the year. Whenever I kind of take from that top 5 that's kind of just spinning on repeat, and then kind of play some of those other records. Those are the ones that I kind of jumped to this year. So.
Mm-hmm. What about you, JJ?
For me, the Don Toliver record, I think it's called Heaven or Hell. Yeah, there's a few tracks on there that I found myself coming back to. What else? Busta Rhymes, Extinction Level Event 2. I think it's the first track. The intro is freaking crazy.
Yeah, you said that in the group chat, yo. That shit was wild.
Yeah, it kind of made me laugh too. That one, that's worth checking out.
Getting Chris Rock on that too.
Yeah. And then what else? Listening to, I think Knowledge had a couple other projects this year. I just listened to the new Playboy Card.
Oh yeah, how was it?
Yeah, I think it'll be appreciated maybe later on, but the fact that he's waited this long to drop it, I think it angered a lot of his fans, which who cares about their opinion anyways, really. Yeah. But there's some tracks worth checking out. You like crazy production, loud bass in the car, check it out.
Mm-hmm.
But Savage Mode 2,
oh yeah,
and there's a couple tracks on there. I don't know. I think I'm excited for next year though. With obviously everything going on, hopefully next year there's some return to normalcy, whatever. And who knows if we're able to go to concert and touring's a thing, I think we'll see some big name artists drop, and next year we'll probably be talking about them. But I think my New Year's resolution is to learn more hip hop. Gotta get on your guys' level.
Yeah.
Another non-hip hop act, or kind of teeters that line of hip hop versus R&B, was St. John. St. John came out with an album this year, and he was going crazy. I know he got a lot of notoriety from the Roses remix song that they kind of used on TikTok throughout the year and kind of blew up on there. But he's had crazy records. He did a record called Trap early on with Lil Baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's going to be one of those artists that, especially for him to have such a good year this year and kind of a little bit of a rise to fame with the album that he dropped, and being an artist that's going to have more of an effect in person and, at a concert on tour, I think it's going to be, a crazy emergence of him in the coming years of just putting out just constant good records. And he hasn't missed with any of his records yet. So shout out to Saint. That's definitely somebody worth mentioning.
Yeah. And going with the theme of being excited for next year, that Boogie single, I already mentioned it a few times, but I feel like that was kind of a teaser at that album that he'll put out next year. Again, Outside, one of my favorite songs this year. Another album too that I didn't get to mention, but like I said, there was about 5 or 6 albums competing for that 4 to 5 spot. I thought ADHD by Joyner Lucas was really good. And now he's an artist that I really didn't listen to. I listened to a few singles or tracks, like one at a time, never really a whole project of his, because I never really found that much of an interest in him. But when he came out with that project, ADHD, I work with a lot of kids, and I feel like I've been exposed to a lot more people with ADHD now. And so for him to make an album with that title and kind of talking about that and living with it, that was kind of cool to see that angle of it. and he had different like interludes by different people. And so it was really cool. Again, coming of age kind of album, self-reflective. I also, we didn't talk about him a whole lot, but I feel like mainstream media definitely is high on him, is Jack Harlow. Obviously that song What's Poppin', and he had the remix and everything. I think it'll be cool to see like what happens next with him, because I think, he's a cold lyricist, but can he put like a nice body of work together, right? I think a lot of his songs that he's put out are just kind of like singles, standalone. Hey, like there's a lot of lyricists, gets good, tracks to play in the car and that kind of stuff. But what can he kind of put together as far as like a solid project? Another honorable mention, someone who just missed the cut, I think, was like the album Everything by Code of the Friend. Again, I mentioned him as a breakout artist for me this year. Someone that, I listened to a lot of their songs in the beginning of the year. Then he drops the album. Really looking forward to what he has coming in store for the future as well. More of on that mellow style. And the same thing with Larry June. I mean, all those albums I thought were solid, but I really want to see him. Want to see what he does in the future and what he can put together in the future. Because again, both him and Code of the Friend have very different styles, and but I think they could both, I don't say blow up, but kind of get to the point where Reason is at now, where they have like a solid fan base and just a solid following, but like really good. They're in their own lane of hip hop, but they're also like really good too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's going to wrap it up for the best hip hop of 2020. Again, thank you guys for doing this. It's been fun. 3 years in the making.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hopefully 2021, we return a little bit more to normalcy as, COVID hopefully slows down and we get a little bit more music to choose from in next year's 2021. Other than that, hope everyone listening has a happy holidays, happy new year. Stay safe out there, guys. And yeah.
Peace.
Word up. Peace.